Hi, everyone, and welcome to Gigging Out. I'm Dana Gagnon, CMO at Every, and today I'm joined by Davis Waddell, founder and tender-in-chief at Tend, an on-demand staffing platform for hospitality. In this episode, Davis shares the story behind starting Tend, from testing product market fit and navigating early challenges to how they found scale and developed their differentiated value. He also speaks to the intricacies of balancing supply and demand as Tend expands and operating a gig model with W-2 workers. We also chat about an unexpected connection between Tend and Taylor Swift's Eras Tour that you have to hear. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I do. Davis, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to have you.
Excited to be here.
So let's dive in. Tell me the story of Tend. What led you to starting the company?
The original vision I had was for essentially a demand smoothing mechanism for hourly work. So a bit of an academic approach, but what I really looked at, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, working in corporate strategy for Disney. And the observation I had just talking to friends that were trying to be actors and doing gigs and, trying to make ends meet with odd jobs, working at restaurants, stuff like that, was that, if you think about the event ecosystem and kind of the hospitality ecosystem in a city like Los Angeles, you have venues, concert venues, stadiums, country clubs, movie premieres, all sorts of corporate events, weddings. And if you are someone who's doing something in that field, whether it's being a cashier or an usher or a catering server or a banquet server or a bartender or a cook or a dishwasher or whatever, that there's really no good way to work for a bunch of those employers. It's a big hassle. So you've got to get background checked. If you want to work for 20 different venues in a year, you got to get background checked 20 times. You got to do 20 different applications. You got 20 different W-2s or 1099s at the end of the year. And I think even more problematic than just the logistics of it is if you do a great job working at Staples Center or the Hollywood Bowl for 3 months, when you go to apply for your next job, there's really no way to show that. And so whether you maybe move cities or you're looking for a new job within the city, there's not really a way where you can go tell this person, hey, I really did perform well. So the opportunity I saw was, look, you could have a platform that is really skill driven. And I'll get into that. I think that's a different aspect of this, but really skill driven, really gets to know the workers, tracks performance in a really smart, sustainable, extensible way. Then you can really create this sort of demand smoothing shared labor source where you've got, if you want to work today for Tend in Los Angeles, for example, you can work at 50 different venues or for catering companies or whatever, and it's one W-2, it's one background check, and as you perform well across all those clients, all those results and all the nice things they have to say about you stay with you. So that if you want to move to Cincinnati next year, the idea is you can show up to a country club in Cincinnati, show them your Tend resume, and if you've been favorited by 3 high-end country clubs in Los Angeles, it should be a pretty quick interview. And so that's really the idea I had. It's pretty much where we got to. It took us a bit longer than I wanted to because of COVID, but that was really the idea. And pretty much it became a reality, which was always great.
I'd love to dig into the early days. Did you start things off? Were you vetting product market fit, manually? Were you doing things on spreadsheets? When did you decide that you had product market fit? And then when did the technology side of Tend come into play? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I'm not technical. So the early days of Tend, 2018 was kicking around a few different ideas. I knew I wanted to start a company. It felt like the right time in my life to do that. Like I had learned a lot from my time at Disney, didn't really have anyone who was relying upon me. Felt like a good time to kind of, throw caution to the wind and go for it. So I was kicking around a few ideas. In terms of when I became confident in Tend, we were doing a bunch of stuff that didn't scale in 2018. And towards the end of the year, I decided, hey, I really do think there's a market for this. obviously there's a very large market for staffing companies. So it wasn't exactly like I was creating something that was so off the wall that, so finding product market fit depends on how you define that, but it was actually somewhat easy because pretty quickly a pitch of like, hey, you're to people who are using staffing companies, a pitch of, hey, imagine if you had, better quality, better technology, a better service. Again, you have to actually come through on all that, but there was obviously a very large market for that. So was able to think through, okay, how do we actually deliver on some of those things? We kind of launched in the beginning of 2019 with a tech platform that was all Airtable. It was Airtable, Zapier, and Twilio based. So essentially you'd come in person. We do these big hiring interview sessions basically. And you'd come in, we do an orientation session, give you an overview. We do a quick interview based on the positions you'd applied for. And you'd leave with a unique link. So it'd be like, I think our website at the time was 10.la/XYZ, some 30 character string. You'd go there, no password, no login. So obviously no financial or personal information was there, but based on the system logic of what positions you were approved for and your zip code and all that, you would see what looked like an app, basically. So you could see open jobs that you could apply for. You could see the jobs you were confirmed for, and you could see your past jobs. That's it. And so we kind of built this thing that looked and felt like an app, even though it wasn't an app. And it worked really well. It really allowed us, allowed us to create a lot of pseudo automations because, okay, if the user clicks this button, then it zaps into our system, we approve, it zaps a text back out to them, they get a reminder text. You create this ecosystem in this product that, though it was not on the App Store, was pretty effective, actually. And so just kind of built that out from there, got more, solved all sorts of, okay, we have this problem, solve that with the same tool set we were using. Fast forward to maybe September of 2019, found a advisor, Daniel Graff, who really helped us out and was able to get me meetings up in Silicon Valley, flew up there, raised a seed round, and then hired an engineering team in earnest to start building an actual app and take what we had done and translate that in. That launched on April 1st, 2020 to about 0 users because LA was in a shutdown. But it was really helpful, I think, for the engineers to basically say, hey, look, to get this thing up and running, all you're doing is taking the logic. We've already built this out. We've A/B tested it. We've done all these things. We've iterated on the gameplay 50 times from January to October of 2019. So by the time we actually went to go spend real engineering resources on this thing, there really wasn't much for the first 8 months of product roadmap. There was no mystery, right? We knew exactly the way we wanted to build it. There was an exact, blueprint for what we wanted to do, how we wanted it to function. So that really helped us catch up quickly during COVID. But yeah, that was how we got off the ground, was basically a janky combination of Airtable, Zapier, Twilio, and a basic web interface.
So obviously app launched, right at the start of COVID. I imagine that was a tough few months, but then there was this, coming out of COVID, or as things started to lift, there was, all these labor shortages. Kind of what happened to Tend after coming out of COVID and the scale that you experienced? Can you talk about that?
January of 2021. So at this point, we're 10 months into COVID, and we had cut our team to the bone. We kept our whole technical team, but operations was like 4 people, me and, working kind of around the clock just to keep the lights on. And so right around February of 21, I decided okay, I have to go see if this thing's actually going to work or not. And I'm not really able to get the feedback from the market in California because everything's shut down. So I booked a one-way ticket to Jacksonville, Florida, and spent about, I think, 5 or 6 weeks launching Tend in Jacksonville, Tampa, and Atlanta. And it was great. The feedback was awesome. We were able to get meetings with everybody. Half of them signed up. We were like, wow, okay, there's actually, in these places where things are still happening, there's actually a there. And so came back in about March of 21, feeling a lot more confident about things. To be honest, I was like, if this doesn't work, I'm going to have to go get a normal job. Like, what am I doing here? So that was great. And then, April, May, things started to go crazy. And then there was the labor shortage. I mean, it was amazing how fast things happened. In April of 21, we had potential clients we'd call, tell us, hey, we're never going to use temp again. By the time we open our doors, there's going to be a line of people around the corner because there's people been out of work for a year and they need the jobs, and we're never, ever going to have a problem with labor again. That wasn't just like one person saying that. It's funny how things kind of get memory hold. That was just absolutely everyone's opinion. In April of 21, as people were preparing, hey, things are going to open up again, there was not one person saying, hey, we're going to use more temp than we ever have before. Didn't talk to one. I thought that even I didn't, right? Even I thought, well, there's been a big displacement. And so there's a role for us in the first 4 months for us to acquire a lot of customers and play a big role there. But even I didn't see coming what ended up happening, obviously, which was like a long, enduring labor shortage, labor crisis, whatever you want to call it, that I think was really, if you look at the benefit of hindsight being 2020, of course, things were broken in the labor market, in this part of the labor market, for a long time, and there just wasn't enough energy to kind of break that static friction. And then when COVID happened, that was like the event that it kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back. But if you look back on it, there's been signs about whether you look at income inequality, cost of living, all these things. If you just look back at 2016 to 2020, probably even before that, it's like, oh yeah, there was a big problem coming, and COVID was just sort of the thing that lit the fuse. So yeah, I mean, look, rates, we were looking at, in a city like Atlanta pre-COVID, our research was showing that like the average pay rate for a catering server was $12 an hour. And by 2021, fast forward 18 months, it was 18. So that's a big correction. And I think a good one. So that was all really great. And then coming out of it, the situation was basically nobody could find workers. It was really hard for us, but because we were so much more efficient than the big traditional employers, we were able to kind of beat them to the same people, make it easier for them, hire faster. For workers, obviously, it's a no-brainer. And so, yeah, we were able to really take advantage of that summer and fall of 2021 to get in the door with a lot of big enterprise-style clients that we would have never been able to get into before, just because we were one of the only people who could actually get them decent people. And so looking back, I was working, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. So it wasn't fun, but for those 6 or 7 months, it was a bonanza in terms of customer acquisition, which, allowed us to really get to a place where we were doing, we became a real player in the space.
How were you balancing? With marketplaces, there's always a supply-demand balance. You don't want to onboard too many workers, and then you don't have jobs for them, and then they get disinterested. But you don't want to onboard a bunch of clients, and then you don't have workers to fill their shifts. How did you approach that dilemma back then, or even how are you still tackling that now when you open up a new market?
It's a really interesting question, and to your point, any marketplace deals with it. The interesting thing with this business is, if you look at the demand side of the equation, it's very different than like an Uber, and in a couple key ways. The first is that in this world, let's say, if a request comes in 24 hours, in their world, that's last minute. Because if you back up to traditional staffing companies, they needed 5 days, 4 days. So a 24-hour or 36-hour request, that's viewed as last minute. Well, for us, given the resources we have, that's an eternity. And so that's a big difference, right? It's not Uber so in terms of the supply and demand, it's a pretty important factor, because it's not like you need latent supply sitting there so that you can offer 15-minute delivery, or so you can offer 12-minute delivery with DoorDash, or you need to offer a 6-minute wait time for Uber. You don't need that supply sitting there. You can have a lag of 5 hours, 10 hours. So you need to have the supply in the market. But from a cost perspective, it's not like you have to be paying the drivers just in case an order comes in. So that helps. That helps a lot. That it's not so last minute. The second thing that's interesting is it's really lumpy on the demand side and concentrated. So one thing I learned pretty early on was it's a heck of a lot easier to service 10 clients who need 30 people each, on a Saturday, for example, than it is to do 300 clients who need one person each. And so, whereas again, in a typical sort of consumer marketplace where you have consumers on both sides and you have, disaggregated supply and demand, in our world, you kind of have these, I call them kind of tentpole clients. And so when you go to a market and there's concentration. So the way we thought about market building was to say, hey, look, we can go get a tentpole clients in a market and we can go land them, right? Start with a small marketplace there, land them, spin up supply with their commitments, and then build the marketplace around them with smaller clients to create that marketplace vibe. So that was something we did really successfully. And, you might ask, well, why would a tentpole client say yes to you in a market that you're not strong in? And that's most of the tentpole clients. So if you look at stadiums, for example, or venues, pretty much any food service, whether it's a convention center or a stadium or a university or a large corporate campus, if they have a cafeteria or they're serving food, they're probably outsourcing that to one of the big 5 or 6 food service companies. So when I was working at Disney, we had 3 cafeterias. Disney's not serving that food. Sodexo is hired, and Sodexo is actually, they're wearing Disney uniforms, but Sodexo is the company that's doing the food service there. And so once you start to make those connections and have a really good reputation within those 5 to 10 large players, which we were able to do throughout the course of 2021 and 2022, you're much, if you've come through for the first 30 clients, getting number 31 on board, even if you're honest with them and say, hey, we're gonna have to build up supply in the market a little bit. If they're looking for the set of solutions that we offer, and they have, there's 5 people that they've worked with in the past at different stadiums who are all saying, hey, these guys are amazing, we use them, it obviously helps that pitch. And so that's really been kind of how we've thought about choosing markets, is where can we find that tentpole clients and then building the marketplace around that. So it's a bit different than I think I've studied and we've employed a lot of people who came from DoorDash and Uber and these places. And so it's interesting to kind of compare and contrast and say, hey, where is this the same? Where is this different? And I think there are some differences in how we've gone to market.
What are some things that you think are easier running like a B2B labor marketplace versus a consumer marketplace? And what are some of the things that are harder, do you think?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the easier side is I think it's easier. It's the same yin and yang, right? So it's customer concentration is kind of seen by many as this bad thing because it's risk. If the customer leaves, then you have a lot of eggs in those baskets, and that is true. But it's also true that it's easier to grow fast when you can add large lump sums of volume rather than kind of adding, it's difficult to grow on a $30 million. Once you get to 30 million annualized run rate, getting from 30 to 50 in, one shift increments is pretty difficult. It's a lot easier if you can, land larger accounts. And I think from a management standpoint, you have to really make those guys feel the love, but you have dedicated account management resources. And so there's a lot of ink is spilt on the downsides of customer concentration, but I think it also can be a nice thing on the way up. And if you're doing a good job, again, it's a way to really grow quickly. So I think that's again different. If you're an Uber, for example, it's nice, right? Like if Dana, you stop using Uber because you don't like it, they don't really care. They don't even notice. At the same time, they got to add a lot of Danas to make their number for the month and to hit their growth targets. So I think that's typically done through marketing, and so it's just a different kind of customer acquisition strategy. Ours almost looks a little bit more like an enterprise sales motion, but we adapted to it. It's something that I've become pretty comfortable with. And again, I think other people in different spaces they've taken different tactics. They have a client base that looks different. They have kind of more singles and doubles. They have lower customer concentration. We are partnership driven. We have a lot of big clients, and that's worked for us. We have, small clients too, but we really like to be partner focused, provide really great results for people that need a lot of help. And so it's not better or worse or easier or harder. It's just different, I think.
And you specialize in certain types of venues. I mean, can you speak to that piece and why did you decide to go after things like stadiums? Can you just talk about that client mix that you have?
Yeah, they're big. I mean, that's the best part about stadiums. But you need to be able to get them a lot of people, and you want them to be good. So the way we thought about positioning ourselves in the market was to say we're going to be quality focused. So we interview everybody that comes on the platform, video interviews. We did in person, and then COVID forced us to, go video, which actually was probably a blessing in disguise. And we it's not a 1 to 5 star rating system. We have 6 different soft skills we are rating people based on that get updated as they continue to work. We have, I think, like a combination of 300 technical hard skills that are getting added, it based on what kind of work you do. If you're a prep cook or a line cook, what can you do? What kind of kitchens can you work in? All those things matter a lot. And so we really focused on food and beverage, hospitality, and events. So our customer base we started with pretty much catering companies and said, hey, look, the difference between us and the next guy is we're going to get you somebody who can actually do the job and has experience doing the job. You're not just going to get a warm body. If you order a line cook through us, you're going to get a line cook who's done weddings before. They may not have worked for you before, so there's some learning curve, but they're going to be able to come in and it's much more seamless, and they're willing to pay more for that. And so that's kind of how we've grown. So we started small. The company is called Tend because we started with just bartenders and servers, and then kind of added more positions as we grew. But today our market is event companies, catering companies, stadiums, convention centers, concert venues, all types of venues. And then we also do colleges, universities, cafeterias. So that's kind of the space we're in. We've chosen to not do kind of more warehouse construction type labor. So we've got a lot of requests for that. We don't do that as much. We feel as though we want our brand to be food and beverage, hospitality, events. There's obviously, you can grow by entering different verticals, but my belief is if you want to really offer clients that quality, you kind of have to stay focused and really just be marketing to people who have experience in the areas that we're, saying they have experience in. So we're pretty much laser focused on that kind of hospitality space.
Yeah, that's smart. Having too many verticals that have completely different needs, you end up splitting your marketing spend, your customer acquisition. I mean, it just gets much harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's hypothetically possible, right? If you think about it, there's no reason why you can't, when someone comes on, you know exactly what they can do. And therefore, you're only showing them the jobs. You give an infinite number of types of jobs. In practice, things are not like that. And, maybe it's possible, but I would say the space, there's a lot of companies who've attempted to hit a certain point and to hit growth targets. They've kind of gone wider. And I'm not aware of any that have done it successfully yet.
I'm curious. You talked a little bit about the skills profile that your workers have. Are you building that out during the interview process? Are they updating their profile? And then are you also getting reviews from your clients after they fill shifts? Can you talk about how that all works?
At the beginning, we've iterated on this a ton, even throughout 2021. Well, really from 2020, 2021, we've been iterating on this. How do we rate people, right? You could have 1,000 different skills, but then it becomes meaningless at some point. And so what's the right combination? Having enough detail that you can get the customer, the person that they want, the vast majority of the time without, going overboard and saying, hey, this person has experience making this type of sushi. It's like, okay, well, at some point it's sort of limited return on there. So how it starts is we came up with our categories we wanted to judge, and that took a couple of years. We've gotten that settled for a while now. And so when you apply, we ask you, hey, to sort of self-professed, what do you have? What can you do? What can't you do? We're very clear about, hey, look, it does you no good to lie. We're going to test you on all these things. And it's okay, right? Like, you're not going to not the things that the vast majority of jobs don't require the specialized skills. So, if you don't have this special ability, you don't know how to, be a flair bartender, that's 1% of our bartending jobs. It doesn't matter, And so we encourage honesty in the process, and we say, hey, look, just tell us. Like, most of these jobs, you need some experience, but really not very much. You need good attitude, things like that, kind of these soft skills, but, be honest. And so then, depending on what they say they can do in the interview process, we have questions. We try to vary them a little bit so it people can't beat the test. But we're doing a live, feedback session and live interview to do the testing. Hey, talk to me about the experience. What would you do here? And so those questions are pretty standardized. And so that gives us an idea. So by the time you exit your interview, you are coming onto the platform with what we think your skills are. To your point, as you then, like, once you've worked, I'd like to think about when you graduate from college, okay, and someone's trying to hire you, well, is your GPA a great indicator of how you're going to do? Maybe not, but it's all they have. So that's sort of what they're going to use. As you've worked for 10 years, are we still using the GPA to evaluate you? Probably not. And so the similar thing with 10. So once you've worked 50 jobs on the platform, the performance on those jobs is 99% of what we're using to evaluate you. So when you come on, it's all we have on you is the interview. Once you start working, though, we're constantly updating our priors, and so and there's a review system, and we're getting a lot of data that helps us do that. So yeah, it's one of these things where I think, like, interviewing is imperfect, but it's better than nothing. And we think it helps us sort of directionally get things, but we're wrong in both directions all the time. And there really is no experience. There's no substitute for experience. So once you get on and get experience on the platform, how you did in the interview probably isn't affecting you very much.
I mean, the fact that you do person-to-person interviews over video, I mean, a lot of platforms don't do that. So I could see that's a differentiator right there.
It is. It costs us a lot of money, but it's one of the things I think that keeps us relevant and keeps us performing better. And that's really important in terms of pricing power and in terms of winning, what can look at times like a commoditized space. It's something that I kind of think helps us stand out to say, hey, look, you're willing to pay a little bit extra because you're getting extra, and I think in this space, if you think about it in a comparison to DoorDash or Uber, it's a pretty binary question, right? Are you able to get me from point A to point B safely or not? Are you able to deliver my food? And so a 1 to 5 star rating system is actually plenty there. But in this world, it's if we're working at, I don't know, a baseball stadium, it's the team's logo that they're wearing on their shirt when they're serving people hot dogs. Or if you go to a wedding, it's the catering companies, maybe not their uniform, but they're representing the client's brand to their clients. So most times they're willing to pay a little bit extra for that. I mean, would you pay a little bit extra for Uber over a Lyft? Probably not. But if you were hosting a wedding or hosting a party, next weekend, you'd probably pay an extra $3 an hour to get the peace of mind that you're getting someone that's, got to be there, right? And so I think it's really difficult to operate sort of this heterogeneous supply, but it does create the opportunity for a bit of pricing power because once you can kind of get your reputation there and sell people on that value, they are willing to pay a bit more for it.
We've talked a lot about customer acquisition. I would love to talk about recruiting workers onto your platform. I saw the Wall Street Journal article and the TikTok video about the woman who, Swiftie fan, couldn't get Eras tickets. So she took a shift on Tend so that she could be at the Eras concert in, I think it was LA. As a marketer, I'm super curious if that was all orchestrated by your team as like, hey, we're going to promote this proactively, or if someone just came across it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
People think like, oh, it was like a PR thing. No, had no idea. We had seen some of the TikToks, but when they reached out, it was totally organic. Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of like our funnel, so we have basically an internal proprietary kind of ATS system. So we have a funnel we look at. We do a lot of the same standard stuff that most people do. So we're using job boards to get leads. And then we have kind of a second section, which I would say kind of the special sauce stuff. So won't comment too much on that, but there's stuff we do to kind of, it's not necessarily, you're never going to compete with Indeed on like cost per applicant, frankly. At least I've never seen anything to compete with that. But I think we have other ways that we found to get, it's a higher cost per applicant, but it converts at a higher rate and you're getting a person oftentimes who's just really, really great. And so you're paying, maybe it costs you $50 to get them, but like is the type of person that when you send them to an event, the client's like, oh my God, send them back to me. And so that they're creating a lot of value. So it's worth paying that amount. So I think about it as sort of like job boards. We've kind of got a series of things we do that are probably pretty unique. And then the third area is referrals. And so that's our best, that's our bread and butter. And the referrals, again, you're paying a higher amount per applicant, but they're coming on, they know what to expect. They've talked to somebody who, presumably has had a good time working with Tend. And so they're coming on, they know the basics. They have a network of people they can ask questions to. They feel comfortable. They know what to do, right? And so, these communities are pretty tight knit. You work with a lot of people and it's cool to go to events and, I've been to events recently and you'll go there and there's like people, oh, hey, if you work with Tend with any frequency, you're getting put on events with people you've probably been on events with before. And so there's a very cool community thing that happens as long as you're doing right by people and the reputation's good. It can go the other way very quickly as well for the same reason. If you're screwing people over, if the platform's not doing well, if the jobs aren't good, if you're not being fair to them, the negative reputation can travel even faster. But we feel like, when you're launching a new market, you're relying heavily on kind of special tactics plus job boards. Once you're in a market, it's really a strong referral base. And it's worked really well for us.
Do you have to price? Well, I guess interesting. Like, are you setting the price for the shift or is it kind of a joint thing? And I'm curious if you have to price certain types of jobs or certain venues higher than others because there's less demand from the worker base. Can you talk about that? How you figure out pricing?
This one's like very complicated because there's like classification stuff. And so, but in general, we decouple the rate that the client pays us and the rate that we pay the worker. And so we are taking on the pricing risk and the pricing reward, if you will. And so rather than a system where if you're the client and you say, hey, I want to pay $18 and we're just taking a percentage above that, I mean, that's much easier, right? The issue is from the client side, it doesn't really work very well because if let's just say you're a big venue and you work for a big parent company and you're the staffing manager and you post your shift for the Saturday at, a $20 pay rate. And I come back to you and say, hey, sorry, nobody took the shift. I didn't need 30 people, but tough cookies. And then you raise it and you raise it and you raise it. And now you're paying, you don't have authorization to pay that, right? There's a P&L, you get into this whole red tape issue. And so again, very different from a consumer marketplace where you can kind of surge price until you want. Uber again does this, but the surge pricing thing doesn't work as well in this business and clients really don't like it. So though it's defensible from a free market standpoint and a logical academic standpoint, in practice, what these clients actually want is to know, hey, this is the price, no extra fees, no hidden stuff. I want to know that this is the number I'm paying so I can model it out and set my budget for the next quarter. And that's that. So if the client wants that, client gets that. So what the work we do is to say, hey, look, okay, what is the number that we that works for us, right? We look at how much we're going to have to pay people, and that's a blended rate. Depends on day of the week, depends on how attractive the client shifts are. If the client's treating people horribly, you're going to have to pay them more to work there. If they're treating them great, right? That's all good. So we basically go to the client and say, hey, based on all this stuff, we're talking through these factors with them and setting a rate. And sometimes we'll adjust that rate after the fact and say, hey, actually, this isn't high enough because no one wants to work for you. And so we'll be upfront about that. But in general, they're paying a flat hourly rate that's pre-negotiated. Maybe there's a peak off peak. We do that sometimes. But then what we're paying the worker, that's more variable. And so on busy days, sometimes there are shifts that happen where we're losing some money. We try not to do that too much, obviously, but it happens sometimes. And so that's sort of how we've gone to market. That's different. It's much more complicated and adds a ton more variables than just saying, hey, you pick your rate, and if nobody comes, nobody comes. But again, to get the types of clients that we have, you have to be able to guarantee them performance at a rate. And so we've sort of we back solve from that point.
And I know you mentioned a lot of your clients are, enterprise level. So you have a blended W-2 and 1099 workforce, which a lot of on-demand gig staffing platforms don't. They stick on the 1099 side. Can you talk about why you decided to have both types of workers on Tend?
Yeah. I mean, pretty much from the beginning, it was when I was evaluating whether or not to do this, it was an issue that was top of mind for me because, sort of staring you in the face, you talk to clients about it. A lot of them are asking about it. If I was living in a different state, maybe I would have just gone full 1099, but I pretty much realized early on, hey, if we want the types of clients that I want, and if we're going to be operating in California, we have to have a path for if you're a client coming onto the Tend platform, you can say, hey, I want employees, W-2 employees, or I want contractors. Now you can't have both, right? It's you're picking, and then you're only getting from that pool. But we really architected our whole system around that, and chose in Every, obviously, at the time, I think the only payroll, maybe there's more now, but I don't think so. Really, that was the huge value. And I didn't even know that we were prepared for like ADP on the W-2 side and like Stripe or something on the 1099 side. And then we're able to kind of come in and say, hey, okay, we have one platform that can support both. Amazing. But we've pretty much picked our vendors and built our whole system around that flexibility, because until we have a sane federal compromise on how to classify workers, it's going to be a state-by-state patchwork quilt. And so we have to have the ability to compete in every state. And so if competing in California, great, we can flip on W-2 there. But if you're going to go compete in a different state, it's not really enforcing that. If you have to W-2 your workers, you're not going to be able to compete with companies that are 1099ing. And so, we were pretty much early there. I think there's some other companies that with more resources got there right around the same time as us. But I would say in terms of strategic things I got right, that was near the top of the list, was from the beginning saying, hey, we need a real way where we can work with the compliance departments of pretty much every company, or else we're never going to be able to work with the big clients that we want.
It's so smart. It's in a way, it's fortunate that you were based in California, because now I talk to staffing leaders all the time that they're like, they're hesitant. They want to go to California. It's a huge market, obviously, but they don't want to deal with it, and they don't know how to. So the fact that you had to build it in the hardest state from the start is probably benefiting you now. Painful in the beginning, probably, but
I remember I talked to one of our first clients was Angel Stadium, and before we kind of gotten this was like 2019, so before we kind of had our act together. And she was advising me all these things and saying, hey, you guys aren't ready yet. It's okay. We'll get you next year. But one of the things that she said was, I guess the silver lining to your point is, if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere. And so from a compliance and policy standpoint, it definitely has made expansion a lot easier. And I know there's been a lot of similar platforms that have started just pure gig and that have had a lot of difficulty trying to reverse engineer a W-2 option where the system wasn't really built for that out of the gate. And so it's definitely been, I would say, a advantage for us.
What do you now know about starting, building, scaling a labor marketplace that you wish you knew in those very early days?
I've learned a ton about employing people and HR laws and policies and just generally how to motivate and how to get performance out of hourly workers and flex workers. So I think I would have probably liked to have been a little bit street smarter when I was starting out. The first 6 months were really, really painful. I carried around a portable bar in my trunk and two different black bistro outfit and a white bistro outfit. And when somebody would go AWOL on the day of a shift, I was driving there and bartending or serving or doing whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I learned the lesson, I would say, pretty quickly, but it would have been nice to, I think, have a bit more of a realistic take on what this was going to be like. Your head, you're like, oh, I'm going to make this app for workers and you're going to make a platform for clients. They're going to select each other for shifts and that's going to be that. It's great. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, there's nothing easier in the world than building that. All of the complexity and what separates the winners and losers is how to actually make it work for both sides and how to deal with all of the problems that come up. And so in that sense, I think it's been, I've learned, it's been 5 years now. And I look back at myself even just 5 years ago, but even 1 year ago and go, wow, like I was an idiot, which I think is probably a good sign because it means you're learning a lot. But yeah, I mean, I laugh at how naive I was really at every year along the journey. So it's been definitely a lot of learning the hard way and then hopefully being tough, resilient and quickly adapting.
I'm sure most entrepreneurs feel that way. I don't think you're alone there.
No, I've heard that recently. A couple of people say that, and I was just like, yeah, that's so true. But there's a certain, I think, virtue in that naivete.
For sure. I'm curious. What are some of the craziest or most interesting events that tenders have staffed before?
We did a Joe Biden fundraiser a couple weeks ago. Very hush, like the private thing, so it's like super hush hush. So political fundraisers are always fun. They have like tenders who are like, oh my God, I served the president. We do a lot of like the Ronald Reagan Library. You have a lot of politicians up there, and Secret Service and Secretary of Defense and vice presidents and presidents. The sports stuff is awesome. So as a sports fan, like doing all these games, we got to do one of our first stadiums was 2021. Truist Field in Truist Park, actually in Atlanta, where the Braves play, and watching them win the World Series there, and watching kind of all these people who lived in Atlanta and who were fans of the team and who were just so pumped up to work all these games and then to work like the victory parade was really awesome. The Taylor Swift stuff was very funny. Got us into a bit of hot water, but it was fine. But yeah, it was like we were seeing so many applications of people coming on who were amazing. And a lot of them, the funny part is like a lot of them are like, they work the Taylor Swift concert and, they're not working all the time, but they'll pick up shifts here and again, which is kind of the whole point, which is great. So yeah, I mean, look, I think we've done between the sporting events, concerts. It's also the other funny thing is I always know who's on tour because we get all these bookings. So like you'll follow, Grupo Ferme or I don't know, Garth Brooks or Beyonce or Taylor Swift. You follow these people kind of all around the country as they tour at all the stadiums that we do. So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the cool thing about it is as a worker doing it, you're working like, I'm not saying it's like the most fun thing in the world, like it's still work, but there's definitely a pretty cool element to it. Like the jobs you're working in general are weddings and sporting events and, the Grammys, the Oscars, depending on, where you're located, but a lot of award shows. It's stuff that's, a little bit more exciting, I think, than showing up and working in an Amazon warehouse. Not there's anything wrong with working in an Amazon warehouse, but I think we're able to kind of bring a younger, different profile of worker to these places who aren't really interested in joining a union and working every single game at a baseball stadium, but would love to work as their schedule allows, and they're great, right? Super smart, super with it, great with customers. So the clients oftentimes are like, wow, these are, in some ways, an even better quality person that we're able to hire ourselves. So yeah, I think that's always been a nice feature of the business, even in the dark days when things aren't going well. Yes, it's pretty cool to kind of have your foot on pretty much all of the whole sports entertainment landscape.
Well, I always like to wrap on more of a future looking question. So I'm curious, do you have any predictions on sort of where this on-demand gig staffing world is going and what role will Tend play in that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because everyone's very interested in future of work, flexible work. There's obviously, I think, something that has to give here, and most people recognize that. I think where we're at is, in general, flex work in the way that, if you look at Tend and companies like us, it works great for the workers. There's really no question about that. Not to say everyone wants that, but there's really not much debate, I think, out there about the fact that there's millions of people in this country who love the flexibility that these apps offer. No question about it. I mean, you probably find someone to debate that claim, but that's pretty well established, I think, at this point. The thing that's less established is, if you candidly talking to employers, they're, I think, sitting here going, well, how do I make it work for me? Right? I get that the worker wants it, and so I have to offer it. I want to offer it, but I also need X, Y, and Z. And so it doesn't work for them to have a random new person in there every single day. They need consistency. They don't want to have to retrain people. So there are the next chapter of this, I think, is how do we make it work for the employer? And how do we get it for them to where they're this thing where they start to view flex work as not this necessary evil that they need to kind of fill shifts, but something that they can actually lean into more and more as time goes on. And I don't think there's no reason why that can't happen. I think that their notes are really well taken, right? They need consistency. It's okay if it's flexible. They don't need the same person Monday through Friday, but they need to be able to work their weekly schedule and have it filled with people who've actually been there before, or have most of the people who've been there before. Right? They need something different than, I think, what we're offering today. We do have a lot of clients who kind of have developed with Tend this team around the team sort of vibe, where you have a pool of 60 workers that you favorited, and so you need 10 per day. And so if you just look at it, pretty much every day you're getting 10 people that you love, maybe 9, and there's one new person, but that's fine too. So it's actually, there are a lot of clients who are there, and they would tell you, oh my God, it's working great for me. I don't have to schedule individual people. If somebody has to call out one day, it gets automatically backfilled. If they have to take off 3 days, I don't have to worry about it. Again, someone else will just backfill that. So we have case studies where hey, look at this guy. It's working amazingly well for him. But I think it's just, how do we continue to productize that and continue to build that in, where we can convince people, hey, this is something you should actually be leaning into more and not viewing as this, again, method of last resort that you have to do because you can't find enough people who want to work for you full time. So I think that's really the kind of next 5 years, I think, for us, as an industry, to grow the pie. And obviously everyone will benefit from that as that happens. But I think that's really the next domino to fall, because if it doesn't work well for the employer, or they don't feel as well it works for them, they're going to continue to resist, and you're not going to get the level of adoption that I think everyone wants.
If people want to learn more from you, Davis, or they want to check out Tend, where can they find you online?
Hiretend.com is our website, HIRETEND. Do you want to talk to me? Throw me a LinkedIn request probably, and I'll give you an email. You can find me on LinkedIn, Davis Waddell. My title there is Tender in Chief. So you've found the right guy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Davis. I really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks again.
This podcast was brought to you by Every. We work with gig companies, marketplaces, delivery businesses, and more to pay their workers fast. You can learn more at every.com.